Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome to a new little review I might be doing on occasions called the console reviews, video game console reviews. And the thing is, sometimes I may do an audio review of a console because I may not have that console, but I'm gonna sometimes also do a video one on the consoles that I do own. So let's start with something that really helped define a generation in the 90s. And that is the Super NES. This is the Super NES. Now, the Super NES came out let me move this camera for a second, came out in about around 1991, 1992, I believe. And it was basically Nintendo's answer to the Sega Genesis. Now, the Sega Genesis came out about a year or so before, about 2 years before, prior to this, and Nintendo was still doing NES games and selling the NES console. And it still sold well, from what I understand. It still sold very well. But the decision came basically around that time, and even before then, that they needed a way to compete with Sega. And they found that way when they brought out the Super Nintendo. Now, the Super Nintendo, yes indeed, is 16-bit. I got mine, believe it or not, for free from my older sister many years ago. And it still works, believe it or not. Now, it did have its own controller. It had this right here. Its controllers were a little more rounded, and they fit right into these slots here. We can, there we go. They fit right into the slot, and you can play your game. It's kind of hard working with one hand here, but that's basically what it was. You could play your games like this. Now, the biggest innovation for these controllers that differed them from the original NES controllers was you had, along with the traditional A and B buttons, and of course the start and select buttons, you had an X and a Y button, you had an L and an R button. And these would basically come in handy sometimes with some of the Mario games, but more importantly would come in handy with let's say Star Fox 64. That's right, Star Fox 64 would allow this. It would be more usable on that, because these would be like your triggers where you would fire. These two buttons here, I think. I haven't really played Star Fox on its original console, so I can't really say. But I'm pretty sure, because I downloaded it on the Wii Shop, and the GameCube controller kind of does that. Now, the cartridges themselves were a little bit more different. Now, in height-wise, the cartridges were about the same size from a height lengthwise. Width-wise, if you will, width-wise or small, insert-wise, they were smaller. Lengthwise, height-wise, they were the same size, but when you would play them, they would be smaller, in a sense. So lengthwise, height-wise, same size. Diagonally, vertically, they were smaller. So diagonally, same size, vertically, smaller. And just like and the difference was between this and the Nintendo, the original NES system, that is, you didn't have to open the door, put the games in, and shut the door. No. You could actually pop the games on top, just like you would do with the Genesis, and what you would do with the Master System. So I'm pretty sure that's how Nintendo learned their lesson there, because later on they would do the top loader, the NES top loader, which according to James Wolfe plays just about anything, whether it's imported or not, that's an NES game. Now, of course, here you have your power button. It would go on. I don't have it plugged in, so there you go. But it works, believe me. You would turn that on, and then here's your reset button. The difference, again, with this is that you could push the buttons up and push them down. And of course, the only similarity to the original Nintendo is it does have a power light, an LED light. But here's the biggest difference. One thing that a lot of people liked about it was the fact that you didn't have to open the door and then push the game down to get it out, to have it pop back up so you can get it out. Here, all you had to do was that. All you had to do was press this button right here, and there you go. Now, apparently, when they did an SNES 2, I think they took that feature away. I'm not really sure. Now, on the back here, you had your RF outlet, which is basically what you use to plug in, which is basically the cable box deal, not the kind of box that you got with an Atari and all that. It's basically the cable box that you just screw into the cable area and then screw your cable onto that. And of course it had a multi-out, so in other words, if you had so it had a multi-out, so in other words, if you had the audio stuff, you could put that there instead of this. It had your channel 3 and 4 switch because of this, because of your RF out, and of course it had your adapter. Now what's funny about this is you can use the same RF outer if you only have that in your position. If you don't have audio video stuff, if you have an RF outer, an RF cable box or RF box from the NES, you can use that on there. Now under here, right here, is an extension. So it wasn't hard to open earlier before I started filming. Okay, hold on. This will do. There. Now you see this. This is an extension. This is for an external. This is for an extension, extension, if you will. And this external connection, if you will. There we go. This external connection was originally, and you can watch James Wolfe's review of the CDIs, his CDI review. James Wolfe, Angry Video Game Nerd's CDI review, to get more information, I think. But this was originally intended to be for a CD add-on. That's right. Nintendo, either through Philips or Sony, was going to have a CD add-on for this, but it never happened, which is a shame. Now, it is overall. Overall, it is a great system. It is a very, very good system to play. It's still playable. The only thing that I kind of feel would have really helped it out was if it was backwards compatible. Now I know you're thinking, well, Brian, back then when the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis was around, there was no backwards compatibility for either. Oh, that's true. But Sega Genesis did have backwards compatibility with the 32X. Now I know, despite how people feel about the 32X, from again referencing James Wolfe's Angry Video Game Nerd Sega 32X review, you took the 32X expansion, if you will, put it on top of the Genesis, and not only could you play the 32X games, but you could play your Genesis games as well. So that made the 32X, that small little round spaceship, or whatever you want to call it, backwards compatible. Now, had they gone through with the Neptune, which was going to be a standalone 32X console, there would be no doubt that the Neptune, which was supposed to be Sega's 32X standalone console, like I said, no doubt would have been just like the 32X expansion thing, and that being backwards compatible. Now you say to yourself, well, what does that have to do with this? Again, like I said, I wish it would have been backwards compatible, because then you could just put your games in there, your NES games in there, and play them on your SNES. I mean, even this. Look at this. This is the Game Boy Advance. This came out after the Game Boy Color, and even this allowed you to not only play your advanced games like that, not only did it allow you to play your advanced games, which we all know, but it allowed you to play your Game Boy games. Now, believe it or not, as time went on, put that back in there, when the DS came out, you could also play your Game Boy Advance games on there because they had this little slot here. They had this little slot in front for your Game Boy Advance games, and all you have to do, depending on which side it went, that was always confused me. Here we go. Just pop it in. There you go. Pop it in, like I said. There you go. You can play your Game Boy Advance games on your DS. And again, I'm thinking, Nintendo is capable of doing that today as well as any other game console. So why couldn't they have done that back then, especially when Sega, even though the 32X was a piece of shit, according to a lot of people, especially James, if they could do that with the Sega, then why couldn't they do that with the 32X? Why couldn't they do that with the NES? You know what I'm saying? I mean, even when they did the 64, they could have made that backwards compatible so you could play these on there. I mean, the Wii itself is backwards compatible for your GameCube games, and it's got a Game Boy player. The GameCube's got a Game Boy player that allows you to not only play your advanced games, but it allows you to play your Game Boy games. Just like when the Super Nintendo had the Super Game Boy, which was sort of an expansion, you got to play your Game Boy games on that. So again, I'm thinking, why couldn't they have done that for the NES games? I guess they didn't figure that out at the time until it was too late. But overall, getting back to the SNES, the Super Nintendo is a great console, and if you have one, believe it or not, if you have one, you should play it. It's still playable. Mine is, anyway. So, hope you enjoyed this review, the first of hopefully many to come in the future. Comment down below if you like. Tell me what you think, and I'll talk to you later.